A third New Zealand swell is poised for California. And an analysis of the 2023 El Nino. I am Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, June 16th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and like and subscribe. Ring the bell. You get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. To subscribe, just click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to make a contribution to the cause, you can. Hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Coach Nate, thank you. You're the big contributor for the week. And then Tim Caston, Elliot Harris, Evolution Moto are three longtime contributors. And then two new contributors, Pierre Morton and E. Slate. Thank you all very much for your contribution. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, and we have remnants of a gale that was developed over the central South Pacific, creating yet another swell, the fourth in a series, pushing off to the north. It's fading now with 26-foot seas over the southeast Pacific. Aim well to the north, mostly bypassing Hawaii, but targeting California, Central America, Mexico, down into South America. So, more swell is on the way. But before we get into all that, let's take a look at what is currently happening. Current conditions. We'll start in Northern California. We're looking at the buoys. The Point Reyes buoy, buoy 029, off of Point Reyes, California, just north of San Francisco. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy, all the way out from 33.3 second period, super long period energy. There's tenth of a foot, all the way down to 5 second period, just pure wind chop, pretty much unrideable junk. But you also see a bunch of energy here in the 8, 9, 7 second period range. That's all locally generated northwest wind swell. Just the northwest winds will not stop. It's like we're getting a late hit of spring. El Nino held off spring, and now we're getting the full brunt of it, and it's been going on for a couple of weeks now. But of more interest, you see this little bump out here at 18 seconds, 1.1 feet. So that is the new third approaching New Zealand swell. Pretty long period energy, offering some opportunity for surf. So if we try to pull out the individual swells here, we see primary surf, 4.9 feet, that's like head high, and that's from the wind swell. 6.6 feet at 7.4 seconds from 319 degrees. And then our secondary swell is 1.5 feet at 18.2 seconds from 216 degrees. That's the New Zealand swell. Theoretically, that would make surf at about 2.5 feet. You know, more like the waist high, maybe even chest high range. Then we go south just a little bit off of the Monterey Peninsula. Buoy 157, the Point Sur buoy. Same sort of profile, a little bit more southern hemi energy here. 1.4 feet at 18 seconds. That's just right at that peak. And then the wind swell here. But it's the energy on either side of these peaks that really make up the entirety of the swell. So we put this all together here. The primary swell, again, 9.1 feet at 8.6 seconds from 316 degrees. That's like nearly 8 feet. It isn't that big, but probably head-high wind swell. Then the secondary swell is that New Zealand swell, 1.9 feet at 18.2 seconds from 231 degrees. That's 3.5 foot surf, so chest high or so. Then we go south to the Point Loma South buoy. This is off of San Diego, buoy 191. Again, here is the southern hemiswell, much larger. You can see it with the peak at 2.3 feet at 18 seconds, and much less wind swell because the Channel Islands protect that area from the wind swell. All right, putting it all together, primary swell, 2.9 feet at 17.7 seconds from 199 degrees. That's theoretically head-high surf, if not more, at top spots with good bathymetric enhancement. And then your secondary swell now is the wind swell, 4.2 feet at 9.7 seconds from 287 degrees. Now that's really like 315, but the islands cause it to wrap and bend in, and that's theoretically surf at 4 feet, but I don't think it's that big. And then finally, we go over to Lanai, on the south shore of the Hawaiian Islands, buoy number 239. The same profile, the southern hemiswell, but now down to in the 13, 14 second period range. Not a whole lot else going on. Primary swell 3 feet at 13.2 seconds from 182 degrees. That's surf at 4 feet. It's actually bigger than that. It's head high, a little bit overhead. I do want to direct your attention to something. This swell hit Hawaii much larger than expected. So this is a graph of the primary swell. You see there were peaks here at 10 foot. We can actually go down here and do a little inspection. Get this in the frame for you. Here we go. Surf heights 10 feet, 10 feet. This is surf 1 from primary swell, 10 feet. 6.2 feet at 16.4 seconds. That was around, what the 1Z, that's like 6 o'clock California time, 4 p.m. Hawaiian time on Friday. In fact, I have a little video of that. All right, and here's Moana Harbor. This was on 4:15, set of the day. Just happened to stumble across this one. Thought I'd share it with you. Pure swell 6.2 feet at 16.5 seconds from 180 degrees. A handful of guys out. The boat's out, and you can see what's coming here on the horizon. Hopefully this will all translate over YouTube and won't be too stuttery. Notice the buoy there and the buoy there. Notice the approaching set. Watch this buoy here. At some point here, it basically, there it goes, underwater. This one almost, it makes it through okay. The guy's paddling. You can sort of see for yourself. Solid surf, that wave there. Looks like a solid double overhead, 10 foot on the face. And that was number 1. Here comes number 2. The buoy disappears again. That one not disappears yet. Wave number 2. Again, solid double overhead. Nice inside section. Buoy number 3, or wave number 3. Oh, poor guy. He's going to take it a lot more on the head. This buoy again underwater. Does this one disappear? Just about at the last second there. Boogie boarder, wave of the day for him. Here we go. Feathering outside, both buoys disappear. Close out set. Nobody goes. Now, let's see, number 6, I think this is. Disappears again. The other buoy just about disappears. Who goes? One guy. Hero. Over wedging on the inside. And then the final wave of the set. Number 6, buoy disappears again. Double overhead plus, maybe? Oh, and number 7. Maybe I miscounted here. And this one, though, not as big. So you get the general idea. This swell was considerably bigger than forecast, than what any of the models suggested. Now, I'm not going to say that it's going to do that in California, though what's already hitting down in Southern California from just looking at the buoys is bigger than forecast. So maybe this is a good sign. Do note that this swell is shadowed in the relative to California. All right, so where did this swell come from? So we're going to go back in time. We're looking at significant wave heights. These are the highest 1/3 of the wind-driven waves across the South Pacific. Chile here, Antarctica, Ross Ice Shelf, New Zealand, Australia. On Friday, the 7th, a gale started developing south of New Zealand and built with seas right there, the little X, 30.1 feet at, here are the locations, wind speeds 43 knots. These are the highest seas and winds over this entire domain. You check the coordinates to make sure they're really associated with the fetch you're looking at, because there was also one here and one over here. And then as we got into 18Z on Saturday, so roughly Saturday morning, the 8th of June, we got 30, those are 33-foot seas. Now notice the coordinates here, but this is estimated about 31 feet, aimed well off to the north, and then 32 feet as we got into Saturday evening, and then fading from there. Hawaii, let's go back as a matter of course here. Oahu's about 158 west, so this was aimed due north right at Hawaii. Tahiti is right in this chain, so all this energy was free and clear between that gap for Hawaii, but it's getting or got filtered by these islands on its path to California. Now, typically, the shadow doesn't decrease size too much, but what it really does is cut down the number of waves, the sets, and the consistency and all that relative to California. So we saw, a macking 10-foot face plus set pulling into Oahu. I don't expect to see anything like that relative to California, but it is possible there could be some good sneaker sets embedded in this swell. Let's move on now. So that was on Sunday the 9th. The system faded out. There's another system, you saw it right down here, that passed east to west, all aimed off to the east. That's maybe swell producer for Chile and Peru, but I don't think anything for Hawaii or California, or at least not anything meaningful. Then we went through this past week. We're into Thursday, just nothing going on. Friday, Saturday, here we are. Now, this was just the start. Another gale started to develop here in the central South Pacific. Again, the cutoff for Hawaii is somewhere like over here. And this system, there we go. As of Saturday night, we had 31.2 foot seas, building to 33 feet, aim off to the northeast, and maybe a little bit less shadowed relative to California, and then fading as we get into current time. All right, so what's to come after that? We know we have the New Zealand swell. It's past Hawaii, starting to show in California. We know we have another gale in the central South Pacific, aimed reasonably well at California. What's going to go on for the next week? We'll start by looking at Jetstream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet to the north, so pushing the jet to the north, like right there. That helps create a clockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure in the southern hemisphere. Low pressure in the northern hemisphere goes counterclockwise, so reverse direction in the southern hemisphere. And what that does is creates wind. Low pressure at the ocean surface creates winds. If the low is deep enough, those winds get traction on the ocean surface, create seas, raw seas. Those seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, the lesser period and elements of the swell fade off and get groomed out, eventually exposing swell. By swell, I mean something 13 seconds or more. And that swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we do have a trough. We know that we know that there was seas generated here. This is the fading remnants of the trough from the day before. You see the trough pretty much giving up as we get into Monday. Then we get into this sort of almost the southern branch of the jet, almost feeding the northern branch, creating this really tight pinched sort of cut off trough here. So we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. Don't really expect that anything will develop from that, but it's something to keep our eyes on. And then as we get into Thursday, really pretty much a split jet stream flow. The northern branch here, the southern branch here. When you get that split flow in between, you get high pressure in these big blue areas in between. That doesn't do anything for producing swell. And here we are now. We're into Friday, the 21st of July, and into Saturday. Yes, some sort of a trough developing in the southeast Pacific. This might be good for Chile and Peru. And we'll see what that does. It's sort of falling south. I mean, there's a good amount of wind here, but the Southern California cutoff's about 118 west. So this is really a Chile, Peru, Central America sort of storm producer, if that even forms for a week out. Don't trust the models a week out. All right, let's go take a look down at the surface. Here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds. Here's the remnants, the gale that was in the central South Pacific, still as of 12Z Sunday, producing 35 to almost 40 knot north to northeast winds, but quickly fading out, and by this evening, it's all but gone. You're not going to get anything from 30 or even 25 knot fetch. So then we get into Tuesday, Wednesday, some sort of a little cutoff low, trying to organize in that tight trough that was there, but don't really expect anything from that. Some sort of something trying to organize in the Central South Pacific as we get into Thursday and Friday. You see low pressure here. We see another like a cutoff low up here, another down here. Do they really organize? It's hard to tell. There's a lot of activity. I think the GFS model really tends to overhype these cutoff lows, and when they form, they're not as strong as they look. But there is 40 knot south fetch here. That might be good for Hawaii for sure, and definitely Tahiti. And then fading out as we get into Sunday, and we're a week out, and that's that. And then finally, what's the effect of those winds on the ocean surface? Well, here we go. As of 18Z Sunday, yeah, little pockets of 26-foot seas from the yesterday's fetch, but that's all but gone. And then we move into Monday, Tuesday, really nothing. We're really looking for minimum 30-foot seas. Little area here of 29-foot seas, but over a small area. Maybe that's good for some background swell, if it even forms. Then we get into Friday. Again, that system redevelops with 28, 29-foot seas aimed off to the north. Cutoff low here under the... Oops! Look at that. Whoa, didn't even see that. 35-foot seas in the Southern California swell window. I mean, really focus on Chile, Peru, but California could see something from that. The backdoor low here producing 35-foot seas, it looks like. And we'll see if we can click away. There we go. 35-foot seas aimed off to the north, targeting Hawaii. So maybe something from that. This is on Saturday, so almost a week out. And then here we go. We're all done. Nothing beyond that. So I think the lion's share of the swell generation has happened for the time being. But that's not to say there won't be surf, just smaller. All right, what is the wind doing? It is, and is just like what it's been for the past couple of weeks, just a non-stop wind machine relative to California. High pressure off the coast, rotating clockwise. Lower pressure, heat low inland, tightens up the isobars here, creates winds. And we have 20, 25, 30 knots in pockets pushing down. So that's San Francisco. This would be Cape Mendocino up here, Point Conception right under there. Southern California protected from the winds, but north of there, just a pure wind machine. That is today. So we get into Monday. Oh, and relative to Hawaii, light trades, 15-knot trades, so not so bad. The focus of this wind is on California. So we get into Monday, the wind kind of backs off, loses some of its mojo. Most of it focused on Southern California, Central California. Not great for wind swell production, just junk production, if anything. Trades for the Hawaiian Islands. But as we get into Tuesday, the gradient tries to lift north again. This is more like a typical summertime pressure gradient. 25-knot northwest winds from San Francisco northward, right close to the coast. Winds not so bad. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. So we get into Wednesday. Hey, look at this. The gradient tries to fade. 15 knots, maybe even 10 knots near shore between Monterey Bay up to about San Francisco. Trades for the Hawaiian Islands at 15 knots. Thursday, still not a horrible, but not great relative to California. But, if there isn't any southern hemi swell, well, it'll probably be fading by then anyway. So, northwest wind swell, trades solid 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Friday, here comes the gradient again. Notice there's also low pressure here in the Gulf of Alaska. Not enough to generate any swell. Trades 15 to 20 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Saturday, pretty much the same thing. This broad, long fetch of east-northeast winds relative to the Hawaiian Islands. Maybe some east wind swell for east-facing shores. Low pressure approaching the California coast. And on Sunday, here we go again. More northwest winds. Trades really solid, 20 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. So the short of it is non-stop northwest wind swell for the next week for California north of Point Conception. And building wind swell and easterly trades for the Hawaiian Islands from about midweek on. All right, surf spot forecast. We'll start in Santa Cruz. North of there, it's just junky wind swell. You can see surf heights here all over the place, from 2 feet to 4 feet. You see the wind cycling up and down 20 knots, getting lesser as we get towards Saturday and Sunday, but then coming back up again. The real story is kind of here in the swell. This is the swell period. This is the swell height. 4 feet at 7 seconds, bouncing around with 1.4 feet at 16 seconds, back and forth. So this is a battle between the two swells, the wind swell from the northwest, the New Zealand swell from the south. And then at some point, the wind swell wins out, but then here comes yet another southern hemi swell behind that. Let's go take a look further south. Dana Point. Now, this is weird, and I checked several spots, and I'm not sure what's going on with the model. It says surf height's in the 2 feet range. That's not even close to right. And the reason being, well, all this is picking up is wind swell with 8, 7, 6 second period. One little reading from the New Zealand swell pops out at 14.4 seconds, so this is all kind of garbage. Now, once the wind swell dies down as you get into next week, you can see 1.5 feet at 16 to 17 seconds. But for whatever reason, this graph just doesn't really tell the story. Then we go to the south shore of Maui. Again, this is probably accurate. Surf height's in the 1.5 to 2 foot range. And really, the issue is no southern hemi swell lingering, the last of it right here on Sunday fading out, maybe some dribbles on Monday, but most of all this is just like little wind swell at 2 feet at 6 seconds, maybe 3 feet at seconds. So, and just little tiny hints, half a foot at 12 seconds of background southern hemi swell. So basically all the fun is over for Hawaii, but what a run it was. All right, we're going to change up the format a little bit. Instead of doing all the La Nina forecast and into all the details, we're going to do a retrospective looking at the 2023 El Nino analysis. We're going to be looking at the MJO, the Kelvin waves, sea surface temperature anomalies, the Southern Oscillation Index, and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, and how that all came together and what effect it had relative to our surf. All right, so what we're going to do here is first we're going to look at all the active phases of the MJO. And for those of you that are maybe new to this, the MJO is one of the major contributors to the formation of El Nino and also for supporting storm production over the Pacific during winter months and summer months that produce surf. There are 2 phases to the MJO, the active phase and the inactive phase. The MJO travels from west to east around the planet on the equator, with the active phase on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other. They rotate around west to east. The active phase is the good one. That's the one we're interested in, because the active phase, what it does, it's like a low-pressure system. It takes warm, moist air in the West Pacific, lifts it aloft up into the atmosphere. That warm, moist air gets caught by the jet stream. It energizes the jet stream. It strengthens the jet stream. It builds troughs that carve out and create low-pressure systems and create storms that then, in turn, create surf and rain. As the MJO moves from west to east across the Pacific, it drags the weather with it. The other thing the MJO does is it, in the active phase, what it does, because it's a low-pressure system, it dampens trade winds. Trade winds are generated by high pressure. The stronger the high pressure, the stronger the trades. You can see that happening along the California coast and also for Hawaii. But when you have the active phase of the MJO over the Pacific, what it does is it cuts out the high pressure and reduces trade winds. And when that happens, that allows warm water that's normally pulled up in the West Pacific to start sloshing east. So we'll get into that in a minute. But what we're looking at here is you can literally see this is 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. The active phase suppresses trades. The inactive phase feeds trades. So we're in August of 2022 here. This is even before El Nino started. We see the blues are easterly anomalies. The reds are westerly anomalies. Now, this is the whole planet on one chart. The date line right here is this middle line here. The scale's off the bottom here. But we're talking the West Pacific. So the far West Pacific starts somewhere right around here. I think this is 125 east. Okay, the date line there. And what we call the Kelvin wave generation area, the area between here and here going down the chart. If you get, and this is the black line here, solid contour, is the MJO, the active phase of the MJO. This is the inactive phase of the MJO, the dotted contour. You notice there's blues associated with the inactive phase. So this is like a high pressure system. It enhances trade. You see the blues. And then this is the active phase of the MJO, westerly anomalies. It suppresses trades. But at this time in 2022, we were deep in our La Nina period with stronger than normal trades over the Pacific consistently. Now we're going to go down through here, and as we got into, this is all stitched together, so it's not perfect. But when we got into November of 2022, the first real little active phase of the MJO started. You see westerly anomalies creeping across the equator here. The first sign that something was happening. I called this active phase number 1/2, and you'll see why I called that in a minute. But anyway, as we get into December of 2022, much stronger active phase developed with westerly anomalies making its way almost to the date line. Now, west of the date line, that's where all the warm water is. These warm westerly anomalies started taking the warm water that was in the West Pacific, pushing it east. That was what I'm calling Kelvin wave number 1, the first real legit one, followed by an inactive phase of the MJO, and again, strong easterly anomalies. It's this yin and yang cycle. But then as we got into January of 2023, the first really solid active phase of the MJO pushed the whole way across the Pacific. Notice easterly anomalies here completely dissipated. Westerly anomalies made it the whole way across the Pacific. That was active phase number 2, followed by an inactive phase. But notice the active phases are getting stronger and more consistent, while the inactive phases and the persistent easterly anomalies that fed the development of La Nina fade. So here was our inactive phase in March, but then at the end of March, here comes another active phase. And this was number 3. Notice the solid contours here, but westerly anomalies pushed the whole way across the Pacific, the whole way around the planet, really. Then we got into April of 2022. Now remember, this was not when El Nino was going. This is the winter before El Nino, and if you recall, this is the year we got all the rain into California. Why was that? Well, it was because of these beginning in January. If I recall, it was somewhere right around New Year's, as we got the first real deluge rain from after 3 years of drought hit. And that was associated with this active phase of the MJO pushing weakly across the Pacific, followed by another in January, February, followed by another in March, number 3. And we aren't even in El Nino yet. This was just the rains in the beginning of 2023. So we get into April, still another active phase, the whole way across the Pacific. Kelvin wave, or active phase number 4, followed by a weak inactive phase. And then in June, another active phase. Now notice it's not highlighted in black, but westerly anomalies made it the whole way across the Pacific, followed by another inactive phase. In July, another active phase formed, pushed the whole way across the Pacific again. That was number 5. Then as we get into August, we kind of hit this kind of a dead period. You notice there's a pretty good long gap here. There were westerly anomalies, but nothing too serious until we got, and we were kind of fretting there. If you recall the videos from in the June, July, or actually July and August time frame, it was like, what's going on? El Nino just died. And then here comes our next active phase. You see it in late September into October. Now, it's not highlighted here in the black contour, but westerly anomalies the whole way across the Pacific, number 6. In November, number 7, pushed the whole way across and strong, but notice the inactive phase is starting to build a little bit. November, and then December, active phase number 8 pushed the whole way across the Pacific. We're in the pretty much well into our El Nino pattern at this time in California, followed by inactive phases. We got into January, another weakening active phase, late January into February, number 9, another inactive phase in February, and then the final active phase, number 10, in March. So you can see through with this chart, and we'll just blast the whole way through this, from blues, a solid easterly anomalies over the date line, to a solid westerly pattern over the date line from February the whole way through into, well, into about somewhere around there, February of this year, and now a much weaker westerly pattern and easterly anomalies starting to rebuild. Oh, see, and I can drag the chart the whole way up here so maybe you can see all of it. There you go. Now we can do the same thing. This is upper ocean heat anomalies. So we talked about westerly anomalies traversing the Pacific, taking warm water that's normally pulled up in the far west Pacific and pushing it east. So I've mapped out each one of those active phases of the MJO, and you can see this is the West Pacific here, this is the East Pacific here. This is the reds are warm water, the blues are cold water. So in November 2022, cold water, La Nina, in control of the East Pacific, all the warm water from these enhanced trades pushing from east to west, pushing and sequestering warm water up in the far West Pacific. But we got a weak little Kelvin wave from the, I'll call it half of an active phase in November, took warm water, pushed it across the Pacific. Not much, but just enough to put a dent in La Nina. Then as we got into December, a stronger Kelvin wave pushed the whole way across the Pacific, associated with active phase number 1. Another in February, associated with active phase number 2. And notice the buildup of warm water that was all here in the West Pacific, now building in the East Pacific. In March of 2023, another Kelvin wave from active phase number 3, and this is all associated too with those storms that were slamming into California, creating the record rainfall and record snowfall. Remember, La Nina was still in effect over the continental United States, so that tends to drive colder air down from Canada into the central U.S., while at the same time providing a copious supply of atmospheric river after atmospheric river slamming into the California coast. So the moisture with cold air makes snow, and it also makes rain at lower elevations. Anyways, we got into May. The pattern continued, active phase number 4. And within each one of these active phases, that's not maybe one atmospheric river. You can have 2 or 3 multiple storms embedded within those active phases pushing into the coast. All right? In June even, another active phase push across, adding more warm water. This was with active phase number 5. And you get the general idea. Number 6. Now here is that break that happened somewhere right around in here. It's like the machine was still happening, but not nearly as vigorous as it was here. And one would have expected this to be happening as we got into this past winter, but it didn't. And that's part of the story we're trying to tell here. Anyway, active phase number 5 in July, then kind of a gap. Another active phase taking more warm water, pushing it across into October and November, number 6. Number 7 in October to November. Number 8, notice there was no warm water. So even if you had active phases of the MJO, there was no warm water left to push off to the east. Number 8 was pretty much the end of it in November. Yes, in January there was something I guess one could loosely call a Kelvin wave, but it didn't do anything. It was mainly just the active phase of the MJO. And then it pretty much all faded out from there. We'll just scroll this up and you can see into June, nothing but cold water remaining now. So we went from a regime of cold water in the east, warm water in the west, warm water in the west, pushing east, filling. This is all on the equator, just 5 degrees north and south of the equator, and this is all off, off the Galapagos and that area off of Ecuador. All wrapped up as we got into January of this year, and now we're back into the La Nina pattern. All right, so what's the effect? All this stuff can happen subsurface, and that's what we were mainly looking at. But what's happening on the surface? That's really what matters, because warmer than normal water on the ocean surface, like over here, so here is Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea here. Here is the equator. International dateline is right here. South America, Central America, Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands, the blues. This is sea surface temperature anomalies. departures from normal for this time of year, and we're in January here. Maybe I'll push myself over there. January 1st, 2023, La Nina in control. Colder than normal water in this area. That supports less evaporation. That supports high pressure over this part of the Pacific. Now, let's see if we can just put this into motion. We're going to do a one frame every month. We get into February. La Nina weakening. February 2023. As all the storms are starting to hit California, as Kelvin wave after Kelvin wave is stacking up, pushing subsurface across the Pacific. But you see them erupting here off of Ecuador and over the Galapagos Island. That warm water has nowhere to go. It bleeds up to the surface. Then it gets caught by trades and starts dragged across the Central Pacific. March of 2023. La Nina quickly fading, warm water building off of South America. April, there we go, cooking warm waters, a clear sign that El Nino is coming, and with this warm water, you get more evaporation, and that starts supporting low pressure development over the U.S. At least that's the theory. As we get into May, look at the water temperatures, really cooking quite nicely and drifting out over the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring. You can have all sorts of heat build up in this area, but it's this area right here from 120 west out to 170 west. That's where they're really monitoring sea surface temperatures. All right, so we're in June, July, August. This looks like the classic setup for El Nino, but we already know by this point in time the MJO has stalled, westerly anomalies stalled, and the Kelvin wave generation machine faded a little bit. Though still, good warm anomalies as we get into September of 2023. Then look at this, October, when this really should be starting to peak out, it's already starting to fade, driven by the fade that happened back in the June-July time frame. Yes, still, definitely El Nino, but not super El Nino looking. And by December, things are already fading out. This was, 6 months ago? January 2024, sea surface temperatures already fading here, and a moderate warm period, moderate warm temperatures over the Nino 3.4 region, but not anything too spectacular. And by February, March, April, here comes the beginning of our La Nina, and here we are in May, the development of La Nina. Remnant warm water from El Nino hanging out in the area, but we think that's all fading as warm temperatures start building again in the West Pacific. So this is the official week-by-week record, official record of sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nino 3.4 region. We're not looking at Nino 4, Nino 3. This is what really matters. This area, again, the area south of California on the equator out to about the date line. May 2023. Temperatures rising to half a degree above normal, building to 1 degree above normal by June. So we get into July, 1.1 degrees, but then stalling and never really starting to pick up any momentum until, maybe mid-August, 1.3 degrees. And then we get into later August, 1.6, 1.7 in September, and then backtracking. You see the weakness. There's not this steady march forward or rise in temperatures. Then finally in November, 1.8, 1.9, 2 degrees. Oh, that was the peak one right there in November. I should have put a line there. But 2, 2, 2, 2 by December, right after Christmas. And then a steady downward progression from there. Here, I'll just drag this up here so you can see the rest of it. And then we're into the fade of El Nino as we get into May 2024. But the peak temperatures were in the, I'll say, between Thanksgiving and about Christmas, which is pretty much normal, but not as high as we would have expected. NOAA uses a thing they call the ONI index. It's basically just sea surface temperatures. These are not corrected, not relative. These are the raw numbers over a 3-month period, September, October, November of 2021. You can see we're in La Nina with negative temperatures, all right? But then, let's see if I can drag this up here. But then as we get into late 2022, temperatures start slowly rising, and as the rains are falling in California in the February, March, April timeframe, ocean temperatures start creeping up. We saw this on the sea surface temperature anomalies. Building to 3/4 of a degree above normal in the May, June, July timeframe. Then here was that stall, June, July, August, 1 degree. Then July, August, September, eventually creeping up, reaching, October, November, December, 1.92, and November, December, January, 1.96 degrees. At 2 degrees, that's the beginning of super El Nino status. Now, this is not corrected. This is raw data. And then you see it fading from there. That is, remember, the oceans are steadily getting warmer. So what they try to do then is pull that background warming out and try to get these numbers to be historically and contextually correct as compared to previous El Ninos. So here's the 3-month ONI, relative or quote-unquote corrected, peaking out in October, November, December at 1.49 degrees, which in reality is the top end of a moderate El Nino, not a strong El Nino. Strong starts at 1.5 degrees for 3 consecutive months, going up to 2 degrees, and super El Nino is 2 degrees. So for October, November, December, corrected 1.49, whereas uncorrected was 1.92. And then you see it heading down from there. So this El Nino was not as strong. At one point, the models were suggesting, peak individual temperatures for like a week of like 2.2 or 2.3 degrees. We were originally thinking, wow, maybe we're going to be hitting into super El Nino status. Then we were making bets in the comments section of the video that, okay, well, maybe, over a 3-month period will be somewhere around 1.7 to 1.8, or maybe even a little bit higher, 1.9. Yeah, we did reach the 1.9, but that was uncorrected. And when they finally come out with the corrected numbers, only 1.5 degrees, not even strong El Nino status. So then I went and said, okay, let's map the Southern Oscillation Index. And you all should be familiar with that by now. But that is the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, basically in the Indian Ocean, and Tahiti in the Central Pacific. Okay, if the index is lower, that means pressure is lower in the Pacific. If the index is positive, then that means pressure is higher in the Pacific relative to Darwin, Australia. During El Nino, you want to see, and you see the graph here, when it's negative, that's where you want to see for El Nino. So I just overlaid active phase number 1. You can see the downward spike in the number. Active phases lower the Southern Oscillation Index. Inactive phases raise it. So the first one in November of 2022, or first half of an active phase. The next one in the December of 2022. Number 2, active phase, you see the big downward spike here in February. Number 3 in March with another big downward spike. Number 4 in, what was that? That's May, okay, of 2023. And you go, we're off to the races. But then number 4.5 hit and pressure started going up and we hit this dead spot. Yes, we got another active phase in, August, active phase number 5, but it never really pushed the SOI that low. And then we got number 6 in, September, still didn't push it that low. Number 7, and pressure's already going up. Basically, the El Nino is fading when in reality, this index should be roaring. If we're in a super El Nino, you should be down around 20 or minus 25 in the January time frame. It was already finishing up. Yeah, Kelvin wave number 9 poked a little hole in it, but really that's it. So what was going on here? Well, we're going to have one more chart before we get into the why, and just to sort of paint the picture. Here is the relative ONI comparison of all major and strong El Ninos for well, for a good long period of time. So you just see them all here off to the end of the chart. All right. 82 was the highest, up at 2.5, with 1997's El Nino right behind that. 2015 actually doing quite well as well. 1991, 1972, 1965, all these at right at Super El Nino status or above. And 57 in the game as well. 1986 here, which wasn't really one. 1963, 2009 was a moderate El Nino, and here's 2023. Again, just barely in the, well, here's the strong status. So this is, let's see, so 0.5 degree to 1 is weak, 1 to 1.5 is moderate, so we were at moderate, 1.5 to 2 is strong, so not even really in the strong status. All right, so what is the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation? It's effectively like a long-running El Nino or La Nina. So let's just take a look here. El Nino, right? Typically, what that means is warm water driven by Kelvin waves building up on the equatorial Pacific. This is South America here, Central America, all right? With winds, trade winds suppressed in this region, and if anything, westerly anomalies driven by multiple active phases of the MJO pushing from west to east across the Pacific, building up warm water here off of Ecuador. La Nina, what we're heading into, and what we were in for 3 years prior to the most recent El Nino, is the opposite. Stronger than normal trades over here in the Central and West Pacific, creating upwelling in this region, drawing cold water from deep in the ocean, creating high pressure aloft, and sort of stomping on the storm pattern. Now notice, whoops. So then we go into the PDO, which is sort of a similar sort of thing, though it is in itself is not a cycle. It is the symptoms of a cycle. Okay, and there's two phases, the warm phase and the cool phase. The warm phase effectively acts like a long-running El Nino. So here is your El Nino up here, okay? Here is your warm phase of the PDO, okay? And what it suggests is that you have, on average, lower pressure in the North Pacific, and I would say also in the South Pacific, and this is key here. What that does is creates low pressure rotates counterclockwise like this. So what you have is upwelling off of Japan, and you have a southerly flow, a prevailing southerly flow along the United States West Coast in California, drawing warm, moist air or warm water up along the California coast. All right. And you also get a generalized buildup of warm water that sort of acts like an El Nino in the equatorial Pacific. Now, the PDO doesn't last for a year or two. It goes for 15 or 20 years. Okay, and we're going to get into the history of that in a second. Likewise, the cool phase of the PDO acts very much like La Nina in that it sets up high pressure, high pressure in the Pacific, driving northwesterly winds down the California coast, sort of like what we're having right now, and stronger than normal trades over the Hawaiian Islands. Cool upwelling there. Well, here's the PDO equivalent of that. And it's the same deal. You have high pressure doing higher than normal pressure in the North Pacific and the associated effects down into the equatorial Pacific versus lower than normal pressure in the North Pacific, and I would say also in the South Pacific. Keep that in mind. So here is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation charted out. And in effect, I don't know the actual details of how they map it, but effectively you can read it as a low pressure, high pressure bias in the North and the South Pacific. And when you have lower pressure, it's the warm phase. Now we're going way back in time, 1896 here, and you see the red, warmer, much warmer than normal temperatures, the low pressure bias over the Pacific. And then somewhere in, I don't remember when it was, the early 1900s, you see we went into this cool phase here. the cool phase of the PDO. Okay, and that went for 20 or 25 years. I haven't really picked it out. Okay, and then another warm phase from, we'll say, 1925 into about 1940, so that's 15 years, give or take, followed by a long cool phase that went from 1940 into about 1975, so that's 35 years of cool, and basically a tendency towards La Nina, or this would be a tendency towards El Nino. Then our last warm phase of the PDO started, I think it was in 75, and ran the whole way through 98. So 22 years or something, 23 years of a tendency towards El Nino. And now, since then, we have been in the cool phase from 98, the last big El Nino, the super El Nino of 97, 98, and ever since then, so it's been 26 years of coolness. Now, that's not to say there aren't these spikes. You see them in all the cool phases, but the general tendency is towards a high-pressure bias over the Pacific. Let's zoom in. Now, here's the same chart, but with strong El Ninos, and I only went back as far as 57 because I don't know that you can really trust any data prior to that, and even that's kind of a stretch. But the El Ninos here are marked, and you see the spikes. So even during a cool PDO phase, you can have, and these are strong and very strong El Ninos. You have one there. Notice it just barely registered there in 65. The one of 72 barely registered. Strong one in 82, and it was either this one or this one. My guess it's probably more this one, but I couldn't quite nail it exactly. 87, the same deal. 91 El Nino, the super El Nino of 97. Then we went back into the cool phase of the PDO. Our moderate El Nino of 2009 there. Then 2015, we still, they poked holes in the PDO. Even though the PDO was predominantly cold, you got enough of a low-pressure bias set up so for El Nino to form to poke a hole. And notice every one of these El Ninos had some warm effect on the Pacific Ocean until you get to 2023, and there's no effect whatsoever. So here's a zoom in of the PDO for the last 10 years. The last little warm spurt, this was not a warm phase of the PDO. It's just a period of warming between August 2014 and April of 2016. And somewhere right in the middle here, we had an El Nino. And then since then, we've been down, down, down. This suggests high pressure bias, a weak low pressure bias, strong high pressure bias, and then even right in here, well, let's get into that. And then zooming in even further. So our El Nino of 2023, which, you know, should have been starting to poke a hole somewhere between here and about here, this area right in here, it didn't do anything. Absolutely nothing. The PDO stayed negative the whole way through El Nino. The first one of what, now, to be fair, it's only strong and super strong El Ninos that we've seen poke a hole in the PDO. Okay, that is, they are strong enough to overcome the high pressure bias that's in the Pacific. This one, though, and we looked at the data that showed, well, in fact, I think I can pull it over right here. The ONI corrected 1.49, which was not strong. It was a high moderate. And moderates, I haven't mapped it all, but I think they tend to not necessarily poke a hole in the PDO. And the PDO, or maybe the other way around, the base PDO state, because it's a high pressure bias state, is stronger than the El Nino, and it suppresses the development of El Nino. So we go back here again, 2023. We see, I'll just pull this over one time. We see, retrospectively looking, it didn't make the grade for even being a strong El Nino. It was a strong, moderate El Nino, but not a strong El Nino. And then number two, you see the PDO was raging. It never made never put a dent in the PDO. So this might explain why, one, we didn't get, though this past year's El Nino started off super strong, lots of Kelvin waves, lots of rainfall into California in 2022, and it looked like we were heading towards super El Nino. When it was all said and done, retrospectively looking at it, it died like in June, July, August, never came back, never had the atmospheric effect. Yes, we got surf, we got storms, but it wasn't as much as the hype would lead you to believe. It wasn't what we expected, and I think the rationale being the PDO itself. You can look at how strong the PDO is right now compared to other years. Maybe not as strong as some of these, but it's the strongest it's been over an elongated period of time for decades. I think that really sort of put a demise into our evolving El Nino. Now the question is, how long is the PDO going to stay negative? And we've talked about this in the comments section over the past couple of years. I was thinking in 2015 that this El Nino here would be enough to poke a hole in the PDO and that we'd actually flip over to the warm phase, but apparently we have not, and we still have a bit of La Niñas to go before we switch over to the warm phase. Now there's some discussion that actually the preponderance of warming and the warming of the planet is actually feeding this pattern. And some scientists do say they're looking at their long-range models. They're suggesting that actually we're going to go into longer periods of the cool phase of the PDO and then shorter but more intense warm phases of the PDO. So we'll go through long droughts punctuated by short periods of super strong El Niños and storminess. Now, I don't know, no one knows really where we're going, but it seems like perhaps, and especially with this El Nino, that maybe something is changing in the atmosphere. I'm not saying it has, it will, I'm just saying it's something to be on the lookout for, as you watch weather from year to year, and most of us here that are watching this video are longtime weather geeks. It's something to keep your eyes on and see if, in fact, the pattern is changing. And then finally, our final charts for the presentation. The forecast for sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nino 3.4 region from the CFS model. Well, we all know we're heading towards La Nina yet again as we get into October and November. Temperatures, according to the raw model, say temperatures down to minus 1.5 degrees below normal, which is moderate La Nina. The PDF corrected version says temperatures only going to minus 1.15 degrees. We looked at the consensus model a couple of weeks ago. All the other models suggest somewhere around the minus 1 degree, which is a mild La Nina. That would be good. I'll take it. We're out, supposedly, of the spring unpredictability barrier. That said, looking at the winds pushing down the California coast right now, it still feels like we're in spring, like springtime has been delayed because of El Nino. We didn't really have any significant winds till we got somewhere into mid-May, and then since then, it's been like normally what you'd see in March, and no end in sight. Water temperatures still down at 49.5 degrees off of Point Reyes, suggesting major upwelling and a major springtime pattern still in effect. Any day now, I'm praying that the north winds dissipate, but it's a clear sign that high pressure is in control of the Pacific. Now, I'm not saying that's a long-term trend. That is typical of spring, and it seems like spring is delayed. But we will watch and see how long that upwelling pattern goes for, and think of that as maybe a sign of what's to come for the future. But for right now, the good news is Southern Hemi swell is starting to hit Southern California. The buoys are coming up. Hawaii got slammed. Their surf was much, much bigger than expected, like almost double. Again, I don't think that's going to happen the next couple days in California, but there might be some good sets to be had, so do your best. Northwest winds still supposed to be blowing, a bunch of northwest wind swell. Good news beyond that, another gale has formed in the South Pacific yesterday, so about a week out. Some swell or so, a little bit more in a week, maybe 9 days, pushing up into California. And then beyond that, another series of smaller and weaker gales with more southern hemi swell expected. Probably not large, but something at least to ride. So there is surf in the forecast. But of course, looking out beyond, we are heading to some flavor of La Nina for the coming winter. That said, the rainfall potential after a strong El Nino is normally pretty good the year following that El Nino. So this, November, December, January, February, we could end up with, I don't think we're going to get 100% of rainfall, but maybe we'll be lucky and get 75 to 80% instead of like 50% or something, which would be great. We'll take what we can get and we'll get snowfall. Otherwise, you need to make your plans to head. Typically, La Nina years, what happens? The jet stream just pushes further north, and then you go to the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia. All those sorts of areas do pretty well snow-wise, and the Southwest U.S. dries out. So we'll see how that goes, but start making your strategies accordingly. We didn't go into all the the MJO thing and all the details of that, but suffice it to say, with La Nina developing over the Pacific, the low-pressure bias moves towards the Indian Ocean and the South Atlantic. If you're looking for surf, as we get deeper into the summer, remember, we're still transitioning out of El Nino. But already there's been lots of reports of solid swell in the Indian Ocean, and I think that pattern will only build as the South Pacific slowly starts fading and getting the storm pattern there gets weaker and weaker. So if you're planning on travel, there's some hints to guide you on your ways. So that's the video for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We'll get you all set up. You get automatic notifications when the videos are posted. If you have questions or comments, write them up down below. We'd be happy to respond. And if you'd like to contribute to the cause, just send a small donation using the special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, we are done for this week. We will do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching and stay safe.